And good evening once again, everyone. I'm Jeff Rense. This is another edition of Sightings on the Radio for Friday night. My guest tonight, a familiar guest, if you've been with us for any time at all. His name is Bill Hamilton. Bill is, of course, a consulting senior programmer analyst who is one of the nation's top UFO researchers. He has worked in the data processing field for over 26 years. Bill served in the U.S. Air Force, in the U.S. Air Force Security Service in the 1961 to 65 time frame, and has been writing and lecturing on UFOs since he was a teenager. Bill has authored a number of books, including the following, which are very well known and considered to be highly respectable: Space, Time, and Gravity, Center of the Vortex, Alien Magic, and perhaps his best-known title, Cosmic Top Secret. Bill has over 100 personal sightings of UFOs and has participated in the communication experiments using light beam transceivers as early as back in 1958. Bill is coming to us tonight from Phoenix, Arizona, the seat of an awful lot of activity lately. We're going to talk about the continuing saga of the Phoenix and Arizona sightings, among other things. Hello, Bill. How are you?
I'm fine. A little hot.
Yeah, well, some of that heat spilled over here, thanks. You can have it back.
Can you bring your mic down a little bit, please?
I'll bet.
It's what are you pushing there, 110?
We were 107 today.
Well, I'm close.
Yep.
I win the booby prize. Listen, there have been some changes lately, and I think this is important because we follow, of course, on this program, all things considered relevant to the UFO research field. The MUFON group, worldwide, one of the very best, of course, the oldest, maybe the most respected group. You were with the MUFON group. I don't want you to get into naming names and doing any of that kind of thing, but you recently left that group and you have a new title. Tell us about that, will you?
Yes, I was, just a couple of months ago, I was asked to assume a position by the founder of Skywatch International as the executive director of that particular group. And that position was held briefly by someone last year.
Right.
And then they had to resign for some reason or another. And the founder of that particular group is a retired Air Force colonel. And I told him I would take the position. I did previously apply for the position as Arizona State Director, and I did hold that position. But when I felt that something more could be done than what I had been seeing in MUFON, and MUFON has more or less become an organization in various states where they hold monthly meetings and they invite researchers who talk about things, which is all fine and good.
That's right.
But when I found out there were very, very few qualified field investigators in the state, and when this incident happened, and there were only two of us, with so many witnesses available, I was a little bit appalled, and for some reason or another, I was cut off from sources of information or leads to go out and talk to these witnesses, and I had to find my own. And what developed from there was I decided to just resign my position as Assistant State Director in Arizona and assume this new position, and I put together a team here of Skywatchers, and we have decided that we're going to have once-a-month meetings, but they're working meetings. In other words, we're deciding how to go down the road a little further with ufology and use high-tech equipment. And one of the most important things is staying in communication with one another. And I started a database. We're going to get pager systems. Almost all of us have video cams and telescopes and what have you.
Right. Well, let me get back to Skywatch International with Colonel Steve Wilson. I talked to the Colonel some time ago, and he was rather candid with me on the phone. He has some pictures up on that extraordinary website they have called Skywatch International, UFO pictures. Two of them, coincidentally, happen to have been taken out here in the Santa Barbara Channel, just off the coast of where I sit and do this program each night. They were showing what were described in the captions as being large motherships which appeared to be cloud-like formations hovering near one of the Channel Islands here off the coast. These are daylight pictures. And I asked Colonel Wilson where he got the pictures, and he sort of didn't answer the question directly, and then he said, well, I got them. And I said, okay, it looks to me as if they were taken from an airplane, perhaps flying by the islands at some distance, maybe a half mile away from the islands. And I said, do you know anything about the pictures? And he said, yeah, I took them. And that really got my curiosity up. And then he indicated that he had been attached, of course, to a very special secret wing in the U.S. Air Force, whose job it was simply to track down and chase and identify unidentified flying objects. And it was a very interesting conversation we had, and it must be fun for you to work with a guy like that.
It gets very interesting, and of course I'm in contact with quite a few people similar to that.
Well, I'm sure you are. You've been at it 30 years.
Yes.
Or is it 40? Who's counting?
Well, I started reading books on this subject 44 years ago. So it's pretty much part of my life.
Well, I should say that's an understatement if I've ever heard one. Now, what's the status, Bill Hamilton, on the Phoenix and Arizona sightings? And I think before we get to that, what we really should do is kind of recap what happened. The video of these sightings apparently is appearing all over the televisions now, and newscasts, what have you, news magazine programs. And the footage is unilaterally considered to be spectacular by anybody with half of a brain who looks at these things. Tell us the dates again, and if you can, as briefly as you can, give me an overview of what happened over Phoenix and the state of Arizona.
Well, okay, this was on the night of March the 13th of this year, and I guess it actually started in the state of Nevada, in Henderson, about 5 minutes to 8 o'clock that night, when calls started coming into the National UFO Reporting Center in Seattle, Washington.
Right.
That a very large formation of a V-shaped formation containing 5 or 6 lights.
Yes.
Was seen passing over Henderson, and then maybe around 8:16 that same night, it's passing over Paulden, Arizona. That or a very similar formation. And then shortly thereafter, it's seen in Prescott Valley, and Dewey, Arizona, and enters the Phoenix metropolitan area around 8:23 p.m. that night.
Same configuration at that time, Bill?
Pardon?
Essentially the same configuration?
It was the same configuration, which is a large V. Some call it a boomerang. It was a swept-back boomerang. Some thought these lights were just in formation, but some witnesses who I have talked to, and I have seen simulations of this, which I now have, say they could see a structure, and the lights were attached to a structure, but there were trailing lights that made it seem like, in other words, they could move independently of the structure. So this is what confused people.
Yes.
Now, that was an event I call Event 1, and the ground track of the object was coming in from the northwest to the southeast. There was an Event 2 which followed a little bit more on the east side of the valley, and that was one of these, what we call the big black triangles. And that was lighted and unlighted at various moments during the sighting experience.
Was this a typical black triangle, Bill, that we have reported all over the world practically, do you think?
Yeah, It was. It was huge. I mean, one thing I hear over and over again from the witnesses or have read in their written report was this was gigantic.
As in, I've read and I heard 5 747s end to end, something absurd like that?
That sounds like a possibility. It sounds like a light aircraft could use this thing as an aircraft carrier in the sky and land on top of it if that had been that kind of an object, right?
This conjures up images of pictures like Independence Day. I mean, these are major items up there in the sky.
Right. Well, we're not talking quite as big as Independence Day, but
when
we're
it gets
talking about objects that some people estimated to be a half a mile in length.
It's too big to compute in my mind, so let's pursue it. Go ahead.
Now it's come to light. There were other types of objects seen both on the far west side and on the far east side of the valley that were more like a very large globe that were illuminated. They were pure white in color on the east side. There were 3 of them seen as if they were station keeping.
Amazing. All right, we have to pause right there, Bill. These could have been scout ships. We'll pursue this conversation. The amazing events, the sightings over Phoenix and Arizona. My guest tonight at Sightings on the Radio, Mr. Bill Hamilton.
Seconds.
Okay, we are back. I'm Jeff Rense. This is Sightings on the Radio. My guest tonight, very happy to have him back once again, Mr. Bill Hamilton, coming to us live from the Phoenix, Arizona area. We were talking about the remarkable continuing saga of the Phoenix and Arizona sightings. And Bill, before we go on with the description, which is outstanding, by the way, how would you rate this sighting up in terms of other big sightings? This sounds like an awfully big issue.
Well, it definitely is, and of course we don't have a rating classification of, this is a Class A sighting.
On the Bill Hamilton scale of 10?
But this would be a Class A because of the fact that we can plot a ground track for the object diagonally from the northern part of the state down to the southern part of the state. The fact that we have so many, maybe hundreds, could even number into thousands of witnesses, that many of them called in, that the UFO Reporting Center received over 300 phone calls on that particular night.
That's amazing. That's Peter Davenport must have been going out of his mind.
Oh, absolutely. He told us that this was a significant event, that he hasn't seen anything like it in over 10 years.
Yeah.
And another thing is that so many were ready with their video cams on that particular night. And I believe that part of it, this is what's so strange, what really helped us out in having so many witnesses was the comet Hale-Bopp. It was visible in the northwest sky, and many of the witnesses I talked to said, well, they were outside, they were looking for the comet when they saw this object moving very slowly over their heads, and were impressed by the enormity of it.
Well, I would be impressed too, Bill. I have never seen a thing except on TV or in a movie theater, and I really envy the people that do. Maybe one day I'll get my chance. Let's get back to the description now. You were talking about small globes that were adjacent and near it, I guess across the valley, you said. How many of those were there?
Globes were big, not small.
How big?
If you saw one of the hot air balloons out here, they were that size. But these were not hot air balloons. There were no gondolas on them. They were glowing, and they were perfectly still.
What other motion did they display?
Well, according to the ones on the west side, according to one of the witnesses, when one of the jet aircraft, and here's where we start to get into some controversy over here, because he claims that he had seen F-16s that took off from Luke Air Force Base, and one of the jets closed on a nearby object, and when it did, it was just sitting there, it shot straight up.
Have you interviewed that witness personally?
Yes. In fact, I interviewed him, and also we were down at Village Labs in front of an aerial photo of the city, and I had him go through an entire description of the event and where he was at while I videotaped this.
So, in your opinion, you would say there's a very high likelihood that Luke did indeed scramble jets, or there were jets in the area, even though that has been denied repeatedly?
I would say, here's a man who said, I would be willing to take a lie detector test
All right.
And he's vulnerable because he's only a single witness, and we haven't found any other witnesses who claim to have seen the jets, but I have gone out there on April 22nd and verified that despite what Luke says about bedding down the jets for the night at 7 o'clock, between the hours of 8:15 and 9:45, I observed up to 6 F-16s doing a loop from south to north and around again.
Right, we had a report the other day that claimed that since 1994, about mid-year, the Air Force has had a very high, intense lockdown on people talking about these things, people in uniform. Have you heard anything to substantiate that?
Oh, yeah. In fact, we were told by one of the jet pilots, this was back when I was in California, Lancaster, we used to run into these guys from Edwards Air Force Base, and he said, oh, yeah, we used to see them during the Gulf War. They would be up there above 50,000 feet. And I said, so what were you told to do? And they said, we were told they were going to be up there. We were told to ignore them and not to report them.
How many stories like that have you heard, Bill, over your career? Lots, I bet. Lots.
I've heard quite a few stories like that. Usually the briefing goes something like this. What did you see? Oh, I saw such and such. And then they're told, no, you don't have the story right. You didn't see anything. Nothing happened. It didn't exist.
Yeah, it is humorous, and
I mean, it sounds silly, but in other words, the message was you don't talk about this. Now we have living here in Phoenix, somebody who served as a flight steward on an Air West airliner, and the crew was flying over New Mexico on a heading toward Las Vegas. They witnessed seeing a very large flying cylinder in storm clouds. They could see lightning flashes. They could see it lit up. The pilot of I guess the captain of the airplane radioed in, asking if there was any air traffic in that region. Upon landing, they were greeted at the jetway by two FBI agents who boarded the plane. This is this man's story, and I believe them. They came aboard. They didn't talk to him. They talked to the captain and the co-pilot, and he asked them later, what did these people say? They said not to report anything. They didn't see anything. They wouldn't want to lose their licenses as pilots. And that was that.
Bottom line, Bill, it's really pretty simple to intimidate people, isn't it?
Yeah. And you know, it's so hard to document and prove stories of intimidation like this.
Yeah, virtually impossible. I'm still wondering about this overflight. So huge, such a display. Do you have a feeling that this was an intentional display of alien hardware? Do you think this was just something done to give somebody a message? Are they trying to raise the profile of this whole endeavor?
Yes, many of us have had the feeling that this was just like a demonstration, a test to see what the entire response would be. And it's just fascinating because as we get in more data points and as we progress with what I call our event analysis, it just becomes even more fascinating. And the sightings haven't stopped, and from the email I'm getting, there's been something like a worldwide wave of sighting in various geographical regions that's been ongoing since last December, and it doesn't show any signs of abating.
That's been, yeah.
The frequency of their sighting of the black triangles is going up.
Yes, that's my feeling through all the research and all the guests and all the programs. There's no question that the ante has been increased. The visibility, the profile is much higher. I'm not sure what the goal of this is, except to maybe drag people kicking and screaming to the revelation that the cover-up has to end. This is absurd.
Well, all I know is I find it very curious that many sources have told me, well, there's only 3 years left. And I can't find out much more than that. I just find that interesting that it's pretty consistent that they're telling me there's 3 years.
Yeah, I want to pursue that a little bit more with you, Bill, after this next short time out here at Sightings on the Radio. I'm Jeff Rense. You're listening to this program, as always, on the Premier Radio Network.
Ten seconds.
Okay, welcome back. And Bill, we were talking again about these triangular craft.
Yes,
I wanted to point out some history of them too before we're finished. Go ahead, please.
Okay. In fact, I have a very interesting report here on these triangular craft, and I have noticed many observed characteristics that are in agreement with what I've heard from witnesses and also what I have seen for myself on a couple of incidents, personal sightings. But here's an interesting fact, okay? I see a plot here from 1947 through 1977 of flying triangle sightings on a worldwide basis, and through those years, the frequency by year on a scale that reaches 20 days, and the highest was in 1975, 18 days, but you have to use a different scale from going from 78 through 94 that goes to 20 days, 100 days per year, with the highest frequency being over 90 days in 1994. And I would love to see what's happened in the last 3 years. I bet it's even beyond that.
Amazing. What's your inside information on these items?
How's that now? You mean
what is your inside scoop on what these things may be from people in the service, in the intelligence community that you hear? Is anybody talking about that?
A little bit, yes. What I have heard on this, of course, now we're getting into the realm of stuff I really can't verify.
No, it's clearly labeled as speculation, but I think that's
right,
part of
it. I have heard from a couple of sources that the advanced triangular craft are off-world vehicles, okay, that we do not have their technology, not the ones in the advanced triangular craft, and that some of them are landing in various places, and certain occupants are disembarking.
All right, let's pursue.
That's what the inside sources are saying.
All right, I'm going to have to ask the obvious question.
Yeah.
What might these occupants look like? Do we have a clue?
Well, we have occupants that are coming here. They're not necessarily the pilots, which look a little different. You might say they're elite passengers, and they look like us.
Okay.
They look enough like us.
They pass.
That they can put on a suit of clothes and grab a taxi cab.
Or rent a car. I've heard this before. This really gets us out in one of the most interesting areas of all, and that is the speculation that they are among us. Certainly, if they don't exactly look like us, they can pass. And/or there is also talk that many of them, of course, have the ability, apparently, of installing screen memories or instant visual deception, so they could be among us and look like them, which ain't us, and we wouldn't see them as anything other than people anyhow.
Yeah, it could be, but I think we've got some real people, too.
Some real ringers in there.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's...
people that resemble us and are somehow, and this is what a lot of people hope to find out someday, are related to us.
Yes, we've talked about...
Past.
Exactly, and they're coming back for one reason or another. It's a fascinating thing to speculate on. It's just amazing to consider the possibilities, which really are limitless. I also have heard, Bill Hamilton, and you've been in this for 40 years plus, that the powers that be that are really behind the scenes and connected to this event, whether it be collusion, whether it be some sort of an agreement, a treaty, an understanding, whatever, the people really involved with this, the MJ-12 group, whatever you want to term it, are worried. You say 3 years. They are scared. They're certainly tense. There is a lot of anxiety. Have you picked any of this up from your sources?
What I have picked up from my sources is that just like I guess in our world of the UFO community, there's internal disagreements over what to do about the situation and its revelation to the public, and what they're saying is that they're not entirely in control of this, and that it's not understood. It's the EBEs that are really controlling whether they make a public appearance or not.
Well,
how they want to condition the public to accept their appearance, and also that this is going to be very. You know, a lot of people want to know the truth, but can they handle it? And it's going to disrupt a lot of belief systems, and maybe some of the truth is going to be unpalatable, and our future is not going to look as bright as a lot of people think. And there's a lot of talk like that. And,
you know, you're right, but that's the old saw that's been pulled out of the cupboard too many times for me that the people can't handle it. I really, frankly, think that by design or by accident, the American public is pretty much immune to any more shocks. They've been through enough. They've seen enough science fiction. They certainly have brought to the doorstep of reality. And if there was an announcement made tomorrow that, gee, we're not alone, gosh, these things are here, I think in a couple of days it would be totally business as usual, frankly.
Well, I think so. I think after the people in PsyCop decide what to do about the society after such an announcement is made,
right,
and start ranting and raving about all this, yes.
It's very interesting. Tell me about UFO crashes. I have a long list I just pulled off the internet yesterday, sort of a history of UFO crashes as they are known. There have been a number of them. Maybe we can talk about a few. What's late developing on that? Any new crashes and any new technological recoveries that you're aware of?
Well, I'm just starting to get back into this area.
Yes.
Because I was well, actually, that's how I entered in on whether the government knew anything about this or not, was my interest in some of these crashes back in the early 80s. And now there's been so many avenues to explore, but recently there's a man named Ted Lohman in Tucson, and he's become interested in documenting these crashes on video, and so he's got a project to do this, without making judgments, right? Just documenting the stories. So I'm starting to join in with him on this project, and right now we have plans to interview some new witnesses concerning the very, very controversial Aztec, New Mexico crash. And when I started contacting people about this and some new information that has come to light on this, I have learned there has been 2 other crashes I've never heard of.
In New Mexico?
And, yeah, one of them is in the Chaco Canyon area. So when you go over to New Mexico and talk to some of the people over there, in fact, Ed was telling me not too long ago that when he was in Magdalena, people were talking about 6 different crashes they knew about. And he wasn't really sure whether they were confused over this or not. So over there in New Mexico, some of these people who are aware of this are talking about a lot of crashes, and it makes you wonder what's going on here. Is there any truth to any of this? And, of course, what we are learning is that there's a very, very strong possibility that there was some very high-powered radar experiments going on at the time that seemed to interfere with the functioning of these craft. And this is why they were being disabled from this. And there's a lot of people that are very skeptical of this and find it hard to believe that advanced technology spacecraft would be susceptible to something like this. But I can tell you this, I mean, we could go into a jungle and be hit over the head by a rock thrown by a very primitive person, right?
You bet.
And so, and we know that our advanced technology aircraft are susceptible to electromagnetic emissions, microwave, radar waves, and it's even conjectured that some of the Army Blackhawks have crashed because anomalous signals were propagated along their...
Indeed. All right, we'll be right back, Bill Hamilton, with more in just about 3 minutes here at Sightings on the Radio. Back talking with Bill Hamilton. And Bill, I want to ask a question. You mentioned earlier that we have been discussing problems, electromagnetic fields, various microwave transmissions potentially harming and, in fact, causing the crashes of some Black Hawk helicopters, if not UFOs, which is certainly a possibility. We also know that the HARP project in Alaska is in operation now, and there are other HARP-like projects, apparently, along the equator in the area of the, I think Puerto Rico has one. At any rate, these installations pump up huge amounts of electromagnetic energy into the ionosphere, and that energy comes down. And as it comes down, it can certainly interfere with guidance and navigation controls and computers on any sophisticated aircraft. I have a website article about that very thing. I think we are facing rapidly a time when it may not be too safe to fly commercially because of the errant and erratic and certainly unscheduled mass emissions of electromagnetics into the atmosphere.
That may be true. That's for sure. We know that an electromagnetic pulse will take out all kinds of equipment. And what's also interesting to me is that we're dependent on all kinds of satellites, and more satellites are going up there.
Oh, yeah.
And perhaps you recall the story of the Telstar satellite that was damaged by a solar flare.
Allegedly, it was fried by a solar flare. Of course, the conspiracy people said it was a UFO, but I don't think so.
Yeah, right. But, I mean, we're dependent on these increasingly dependent on these sophisticated systems. So something that can take them out, and any advanced technology is dependent on something to do with electromagnetics. I mean, it's one of the basic forces in the universe.
Sure. Let me ask you an extremely controversial question now. In your opinion, Bill Hamilton, are we, according to your sources, in any way, shape, or form engaged in hostile activity toward alien visitors vis-a-vis Star Wars technology? Are we shooting at them?
Well, of course, I'll have to... I'm not answering for me. I'm just a messenger. So
I will not shoot you.
Don't weigh these words that heavily, but I have been told virtually by all of my sources that, yes, we are shooting at them.
Is that the
there is a secret war of some kind going on.
Is that the single most insane behavior that you have ever heard of human beings engaged in?
Well,
got to be up there in the top 10.
I hope they know what they're doing. What really disturbs me is when I am hearing allegedly from scientists that this advanced technology that's being experimented with also has to do with hyperdimensional physics and time travel. And that's getting into the scary area to think that let's say, for instance, the Air Force has some secret project in which it is experimenting with time. I'm not sure that I would like to have them have that kind of responsibility without accountability.
I don't think there's much accountability anymore for anything, but that may be beside the point.
Yeah, right.
We've all seen, most of us have seen STS-48, the space shuttle footage of what quite clearly looks to be the shooting of particle beam weapons from the Earth's surface up at some objects in the upper atmosphere. There is another piece of footage showing apparently similar activity. My question to you is...
you mean shooting at that little piece of ice that was just...
of course, yes. The piece of ice that did a 180-degree turn and took off at 15 to 20,000 miles an hour.
Now, have you seen the STS-80 footage?
No, you have, I haven't. I am at a disadvantage. How did it look?
This footage is just terrific. And, of course, we got some of that on tape now. They can be ordered from UFO AZ in Tucson.
Well, let's give that. You want to give that information out during the program? You're certainly welcome to.
Right. I don't have the. I know if anybody went out to my website, which I will give later on, they can go out to the bulletins page and just click there on the UFO AZ site and call the number that's listed out there, or maybe I can find the number, give it later on.
Right. My question really is heading toward the crashed saucer issue. Are we recovering saucers that then again maybe we have actually brought down intentionally? Now we talk about Roswell and some of the New Mexico crashes as perhaps being inadvertent, but do you think we're actually bagging something and then going and getting it?
I think that's a very distinct possibility. I wouldn't discount it, and of course we're zooming down the track here and glossing over a lot of controversy and argument involving these crashes, but hypothetically we could say at this point that if we accept this is happening and some of the rumors that we have heard and some of the little bit of evidence that we have seen, we could probably conclude that, some of them are being shot down and they're plotting their trajectories and they're sending a rapid response team to the site and picking it up.
That's similar to what may have happened in Varginha, Brazil last January, too. That sort of fits the profile there. Time for our next break, Bill Hamilton, and we shall continue here at Sightings on the radio, on the Premier Radio Network. All right, the remaining 3 minutes with Bill Hamilton this first hour. We're going to talk about many more things in hour number 2, and we'll give the phone number out if you'd like to call in and ask a question of Bill, 1-800-745-6655. Toll free, of course, that's 745-6655. With respect to shooting at things, STS-48, STS-80, video footage, pretty compelling stuff. Have you ever heard, Bill, anyone talk to you about the actual mechanics of how this is done, naming a weapons type?
The only, other than S-band radar, which is something one of my sources told me about, they found out in the early days that a directed beam in the S-band of radar had a deleterious effect on some of these craft. Mm-hmm. I was very interested in hearing whether this is a valid story of one of the shoot-downs or not, which is the 1989 South African case.
Yes.
What fascinated me about that was the mention of a jet aircraft that was armed with a maser cannon. Now, that's a microwave type of laser.
Maser, M-A-S-E-R, yeah.
Right. And I would think that that's a very coherent, directed beam of microwave energy that could be directed at one of these craft. And so if radar could interfere with it, that definitely could do some damage.
I still come to the opinion that this is almost an absurdity to consider, because if these beings weren't benevolent and kind, and we were doing this, it would seem to me that they would come back and selectively begin reducing some of the sources of their irritation, if you follow my drift.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm not certain what they're up to or whether they're oriented in that fashion. There are a few stories that beams have projected from their craft and melted certain things, and also there is a case of two jets. Let's see, I think...
the Tomcats?
What year, but this goes back to Cuba.
Oh, Puerto Rico.
No, this is
the Cuban. Okay, I'm with you. Yeah.
Yeah, and one of them exploded, the lead jet,
right,
chasing this object.
Right.
So maybe selectively they might be taking out some things.
Well,
and if they are, would the military report it to us? I mean, if a plane suddenly disappeared or they took out something, some military installation, maybe we're not getting the full report.
I think that's a pretty safe bet. We also have the story of two F-14s in Puerto Rico. You know that one.
Yes.
Allegedly flying and closing on an object, and one, then the other disappeared.
Gobbled up?
Yeah. And nothing in the paper about that either. That's hour number one, Bill. We're going to come back and talk with you about much more, including the latest on underground base and tunnel stories, and that is a wild one, folks, so don't miss that. New scientific discoveries supporting the ET hypothesis.
1 minute.
Extra dimensions. This is a topic that goes and goes and goes. It's always enigmatic, always puzzling, always fascinating, and never boring. So sit tight, Bill. We shall return after the news here in a couple of minutes. I'm Jeff Rense. You're listening to Sightings on the radio, on the Premier Radio Network. And welcome back, everybody, to hour number two, Sightings on the Radio. I'm Jeff Rense, and you're listening to this program, as always, on the Premier Radio Network. My guest tonight, Bill Hamilton, longtime UFO researcher, investigator, author, lecturer, and always a pleasure to have on this program. We are talking about many things of a rather esoteric nature tonight when it comes to this field, but things that need to be talked about in greater detail. I think, Bill, maybe the ultimate question, the ultimate secret, again goes back to that word I used earlier, possible collusion at very high levels, compartmentalized, no doubt, but certainly collusion between members of our, quote, government or military-industrial complex and an off-planet species, or maybe more. Now, if that's the case, there may well be a lot of truth to the rumors, long-standing, of underground facilities and bases at which we share, or certainly maybe have even given to the alien species to do whatever they are doing. We'll pursue this to logical ends later on in the program, but right now, let's talk about your concept of underground tunnels and bases and where we are with that now. I've had, of course, Richard Sauter on the program a couple of times in the past, and just to put one more note in here before you start, as early as 1972 and 73, there were patents granted to scientists and engineers for high-speed, high-powered, nuclear-powered underground tunnel boring machines. These things are huge. This is 25 years ago. All right, Bill, go ahead.
Yes, that's true. You're probably referring to the subterrane.
Exactly.
One of those. And they also planned a counterpart called the subsaline for the lunar tunnel boring machine.
Right. And you don't grant patents for something that that doesn't exist.
Oh, absolutely. I've seen photographs of tests done of this nuclear tunnel boring machine. It's a thermal kerf penetrator, as they call it. And not only that, I have copies of the patents and have copied any documentation that I could find on underground facilities of whatever nature. And what I have started to find out is that there are several classifications of these. There are emergency shelter facilities. Probably one of the premier ones that's been known for a number of years is that of Mount Weather, which is now controlled by the FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency.
Now, when you say emergency shelter, Bill, excuse me, who are these facilities designed to shelter?
Well, probably, according to some of the executive orders that I've read, the original shelters are for the purpose of continuity of government. In other words, to shelter some of the officials in government.
That's a pretty shop-worn cliche, isn't it?
Yeah, but I think that it's probably gone beyond that, and but I'm more interested in underground military facilities and underground laboratory facilities.
Absolutely. Let's discuss that. Now, we're talking, of course, the average listener who knows a little bit about this subject might say, well, gee, there's something at Area 51 underground. Well, folks, that's just the tip of the proverbial iceberg.
Oh, no. Yeah, you're right, because almost every major military base anywhere has an underground facility of some sort. And, for instance, one of the ones that has fascinated us for a number of years is the rumors of the underground areas out at the 29 Palms Marine Base. And another one is out at China Lake,
right?
An underground facility known as the Mine, because they used an old borax mine, and they started with that to complete the facility underground.
And these can be located in urban areas, too. We don't always have to keep this mindset of distant locations in hostile lands and so forth, deserts, mountains, barren areas. These can be right in and under any major city. Thanks.
Oh, definitely. And for what I've found out there, and this is only from internal security, and
yes.
Real good security, because then they talk.
the best kind.
But a colleague of mine is a security officer who's held several of these jobs, and he told me about, for instance, the underground facilities right under the TRW building in California.
That's in El Segundo, I think, or somewhere down there.
Yeah, and that a lot of these, especially defense contractors, have underground facilities, and I believe that the defense contractors are very, very heavily into the whole cloak of secrecy surrounding this subject because of their involvement with the reverse engineering and development of the technology.
Well, they're the folks doing most of it, quite frankly, from all I can gather.
Yeah.
You know, let me ask you to describe. You said there are three types of underground facilities. Let's go to Type 2 and Type 3, which is military, and then potentially scientific and laboratory use, I guess, after that. But
right.
How big, Bill, can some of these facilities be? We've got to paint a picture in the listeners' minds. How large can these underground facilities be, and how sophisticated can they be?
Well, there are some areas in... mostly, you know, you go down through a hallway, let's say an underground hallway, and there's a number of doors, and of course, you have to have some kind of a clearance to enter any particular kind of door, and you'll find an office or a laboratory or something like that. But everyone has described some area that is big or bigger than an entire football field. That's underground. Not only that, they describe living quarters in terms of condominiums. Maybe they have bowling alleys and movie theaters and places to keep operations personnel entertained, just as we do here, because a lot of them may be working underground for a period of 2 weeks before they're let out and given a few days off or something like that. It's even not impossible for entire populations now to maybe be supported in an underground city of some sort. And in fact, there was an installation in the Soviet Union that was so large that it could, I believe, house over 150,000 people. And so it was virtually an underground city.
And how deep, Bill, are we talking about here?
Well, you know, a lot of people, there are, again, two kinds of underground facilities. Those that only start a few feet below ground, and then they go down level by level. Instead, you know, just like you have floors in a building, the underground facilities are known by levels, and then the numbers ascend as you go down. So level 1 is closest to the surface,
sure,
and may only be 14 to 20 feet down. See, but then maybe you're down to level 7 and you're 400 feet down or something like that. But there are also what are known as deep underground facilities, and not much is known about those, except that they could go down a mile into the earth.
And then we come to the most fascinating part of it all, perhaps, that many of these underground facilities, which again can stretch from coast to coast in location, are possibly connected with high-speed tunnel systems.
That's true, and I can tell you a story. Some of the sources of my information are even people I work with, because they're high-tech people, okay, and they come from various backgrounds. And I went up to this, one of my fellow workers who was still a colonel in the National Guard. He flew an Apache Longbow helicopter, and I just went up to him cold, and I said, "Hey, Colonel," I said, when you were in the service, I said, "Did you ever work in an underground facility?" And he didn't even hesitate. He looked up at me and he said, "Which one?" And I'm going, "You tell me." And then that's when he proceeded to tell me that he would go into what we might call like a station below ground that was something like a underground missile silo at White Sands.
Sure.
And he'd take the Lev. And I said, "The Lev?" And I said, "Are you saying a maglev?" And he said, "Oh, yeah." And he says, "Maybe I'd ride on them for 15 minutes, maybe as long as 2 hours." And I said, "So where did you get off?" And he said, "We'd never know. We could be in another state. I wouldn't know where I was working." He says, "But I'll tell you this." And he seemed proud of this. He said, "I've been down to level 7. Now, this is a man, by the way, who had degrees in plasma physics and was also doing some consulting work with NASA and the nuclear power generating plant out here. And he was a PC programmer and a really, really intelligent guy. And
he didn't seem to be too worried about national security oaths and all that.
No, he was bragging about this because there was something happened a while ago, and he says, "Well, Clinton knows nothing about this. He's not a military man."
I've heard that the presidents of late have all been completely insulated from much of what goes on, which according to my view of things, may be all for the best. So we'll be right back with Bill Hamilton and talk more about this most intriguing subject of underground cities and bases as we continue here at Sightings on the Radio. Okay, Bill, we were talking earlier about these underground tunnel boring machines, and I think we need to digress just a moment to explain to our listeners how these tunnels could be constructed, because when you talk about tunnels to people, you know what the response is. Well, gee, what do they do with all the dirt? How do they get the dirt up out of the ground? Wouldn't we see huge piles of dirt, concrete mixing trucks and all of that, because they have to pour this and that? No, it's a whole different technology.
Right.
Let me give a little quick synopsis, if you will, and you tell me what I've missed or what I've left out. These machines have, you wouldn't call them a bit, but the front piece on the machines actually becomes, in some cases, when they use thermal energy, so hot that solid rock, what appears to be solid rock, which it really isn't because it's full of space, will actually melt. They'll turn it into liquid and extrude it up into the surrounding rock as this round probe goes through the earth at a fairly high rate of speed. When the hot rock then is extruded around it, and the actual tunnel boring machine moves ahead. What's left behind is a round tunnel with, if you will, a lava flow all around it. A perfectly seamless round tube is left behind as that rock cools down. And that machine can make hundreds of yards of progress a day, we think. Is that a fair synopsis?
I would say so, yes. The penetrator is called a kerf penetrator. It emits a thermal wave, and that thermal wave penetrates the rock from the center outward and heats it and leaves a vitreous or glass-like lining along the tunnel.
Obsidian.
Right, and that's the way it hardens. It's a very smooth surface. Now, what's amazing, for instance, this colonel that rode in the maglev, and as you know, a maglev uses magnetic levitation along a track, and as he described it to me, a laser guidance and positioning system so that it maintains a centered position in the tunnel. Now, what a lot of people don't know, and in fact, he thought of an improvement on the system by having ring magnets line the tunnel, but the tunnel is partially evacuated of air, okay, to reduce air resistance for the plane train that goes down the tunnel.
Right.
And it is theoretically possible, okay, for these trains to reach velocities of 16,000 miles per hour in these partially evacuated tunnels and maintain their centered position. The only thing is it would be a little uncomfortable in terms of acceleration, deceleration for the passengers, so it would go a slightly slower speed. But there are engineers at MIT who are proposing that we put in a coast-to-coast commercial system that would have like one stopover somewhere in Texas and go from L.A. to New York. And it's just absolutely incredible. And, of course, what they're proposing is stuff that one engineer said he had learned from being in classified underground facilities.
Well, that's very interesting. I wonder if it'll come to pass, because it would certainly open the door to one secret program, wouldn't it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's just, if some of this technology were to be released to the world as we know it, would change dramatically.
Yeah. And also, it's our technology. This is not ET technology. We've had this.
No, we have some very clever, inventive people.
Yes, we do. And what we also hear constantly, and maybe you'll agree or disagree, that the level of technology that we Earthlings have actually attained is probably 40 to 50 years ahead of that which the average American is aware of.
Oh, I'm pretty sure, because another thing that this colonel told me, which is a little bit scary, is we have some very awesome weapons of tremendous magnitude that the public knows nothing about. And I'm sure that he was talking in terms of directed energy weapons, perhaps plasmoid-type weapons or microwave-type weapons and things of this nature.
So we have...
but, that's in terms of, there are no holds barred when it comes to weapons. Isn't that amazing? But why don't we apply the same minds to developing technology that could benefit everyone on Earth, just as Nikola Tesla was attempting to do in advancing human civilization?
Nikola apparently became quite spiritually advanced in his later years and did endeavor to hold some of this technology back. I've heard that from two or three people who probably are in a pretty good position to know. This whole scenario of underground cities and bases connected by tunnels is just amazing to contemplate. The question would be, I guess we should ask you, Bill, is what's going on in most of these facilities?
Well, now that's a good question, and what we have heard is stories, certain people saying that there are, how would you call it, like alien housing units in some of the deeper levels of these facilities, that we have some kind of collaborative effort with the aliens, and
kind of like a co-ed dorm, right?
Well, they have their own separate facility,
right,
but they cooperate in their work efforts. And what the objective is, I'm totally uncertain of, but here's what's interesting is when so-called abductees, certain abductees have come up, and there's quite a few of them that are quite credible, that have come up with stories of being taken to some of these underground facilities and seeing human and military personnel or like doctors, like with white lab coats on, in company with some of these EBEs that have been seen down there.
Little grays.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we had Melinda Leslie on last night, who talked quite a bit about the military involvement in abductions.
And my wife has been involved with that, and she's has had interference directly in her life by the military involving these abductions that she's experienced.
Now, you and your wife are speaking in Orange County, California. We want to make note of that. Could you tell us that? Because I promised Melinda we would mention the time and the location of your address.
It's at Melinda's place, but I'm not sure where the address is.
Okay, if you have the date. Yeah, well, give us a date, and before we close the show, we'll give people information who are in Southern California.
My wife's giving me that information, so I'll be, here it is. We're speaking at the Learning Light Foundation, and the address is 1212 East Lincoln Avenue, and that will be on Saturday at 7:30 p.m., and we're also, for those who can't make that one, who are in San Diego, will be speaking at 1 p.m. at the Taoist Sanctuary, 4229 Park Boulevard, which is on the corner of Park Boulevard and El Cajon Boulevard.
Okay, good.
In San Diego.
Good. All right, back to the underground tunnels and bases. Now, it is commonly reported by abductees, not all of them, but some of them, that they do see people, humans, in military uniforms. They do see people in white lab coats holding clipboards. They do see buildings and structures with not the typical E.T. craft round room, invisible doorways opening, but they see human doors, human construction. And they assume that these are some underground bases or another. We also have reports of people who have been abducted, taken on board a craft, and Melinda Leslie is one of them, being given examinations, and looking and seeing in that same room, that round room, which is lit up, but you see no light bulbs, of course, with grays in it. She'll see someone in a uniform, a military uniform, standing off to the side, watching. So that again brings up the issue, and the evidence is quite substantial now, circumstantial, but it is there, and it's growing, that our military, certainly some faction of our military, is actively involved, and has been for some time, with at least one sort of extraterrestrial creature here on this planet. And we'll be right back with much more here at Sightings on the Radio with Mr. Bill Hamilton in just a couple of minutes, so don't go away. No.
1 minute.
The end of the line.
All right, we are back, and a voice from the past. Bill Hamilton,
Sorry, Jeff.
We are talking about underground bases and tunnels and what may or may not be going on down there. It is a little disconcerting for UFO abductees to see humans standing around. It's bad enough to be taken away and violated by a little gray guys, but the idea that humans are interacting with aliens is a bit much for some of them. And how do you see that situation?
Well, I see this where they have an advantage in this particular case because, of course, in some cases they're telling the people, we're not worried if you tell the public about this because they'll never, ever believe it. And, of course, I'm still running into people that are finding it hard to believe that some kind of an alien craft is flying through the sky.
Well, that's
They're much more comfortable with the idea maybe it's just a secret military experiment.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And it's funny, you think about the black budget programs for the Aurora and other high-tech aircraft, and in reality, those programs may be being allowed to continue simply as diversion, correct?
Well, yeah, it might be. And what's so strange is we have a similar type of program going on in which if we do have these type of aircraft like the Aurora, there's the same kind of denial going on. There is no such aircraft. Well, what are people seeing? What are aviation experts who are now looking for these type of aircraft, just like we look for UFOs, and they spot something or they photograph something and they report it, and yet now we're even denying that our own aircraft exist.
It's pretty amazing.
It's just it's getting to the point of where is the credibility, and who do you believe, and how do you assess all of this information?
Well, as I've said before on this program, Bill, with computers, with people who will not tell the truth, we now have entered an age of no accountability and no way to really, truly accredit anything.
Yeah.
You can take anything apart and disprove it, quote unquote. I mean, it's gotten to the point where it's slipped into a gray basket. It's all in a gray basket now.
Why aren't we doing anything about the cattle mutilation?
Exactly, which are occurring again in North America. What about, again, to get back to this alien abduction issue, which we have done so many programs on and will continue to do, because that may well be at the very heart of the entire UFO ET issue. The abductions and the expected, the suggested, the postulated program of hybridizing human eggs and sperm with some sort of counterpart from the alien realm, which is here. The taking of women, the removal of eggs, the returning of women to a UFO craft, the placing in her arms of a child, the telling of her telepathically or mentally that it's her child. We've heard these stories so many times. You deal with this. That makes it even tougher, I think, for Americans to even begin to remotely grasp or comprehend the fact that there may be collusion going on here. It's like we have been sold out at a level that nobody can even understand.
That's well, it's a possibility. Now, we might also consider the possibility that the people involved in the collusion don't have a whole lot of choice about it. Or
I would think that's true, Bill. I would really think that we are not in a position to dictate terms to any of these folks.
I mean, if you're thinking, this is when we think on a scale of asking questions about the origin and nature of this alien presence, then we have to think we have to start using our imagination, and not to contrive something, but in order to start grasping, to comprehend what this is all about. And this is we're a very, very small planet in a very, very big universe. Don't you think?
Oh, absolutely right, which is teeming with life, and it is, contrary to Carl Sagan, it is coming here quite regularly. And
right.
We who study this are aware of the overwhelming amount of evidence of many different kinds, a multiplicity of types, which for decades has been amassing, which make it not even, it's moot. I mean, it's not even a contest anymore. They're here. The question is, the cover-up continues with such blatant arrogance, and they, pardon me for using such a cliche, but they continue to get away with it to a reasonable degree, which is amazing to me.
Well, what's interesting is that all the skeptics and debunkers that all of them are coming out of the woodwork and speaking out. They're getting on the net. They're writing books.
Oh, they're getting worked up to a fever pitch.
Oh, absolutely. And it makes you wonder, well, what's motivating them? Is it just because it's a celebration of the 50th anniversary.
You know, you knew, I guess, that the Smithsonian itself is going to issue a book this fall, and I think it's entitled Roswell, Genesis of a Myth, or something very close to that. Now, here you have the hallowed halls of the Smithsonian regurgitating a book that is so clearly bogus and patently false on its premise that you wonder who's pulling the Smithsonian strings.
Yeah, there's got to be some real power behind pulling all of these strings.
Yeah, and they're still at it, as you've made it quite clear. The debunkers, the so-called skeptics, these are just trash artists coming out with both barrels blazing and literally getting major media time with no trouble at all. We've seen it. We name individuals here who come out of nowhere with these outlandish stories on one end, and then you got the skeptics on the other who always seem to appear on television programs to, quote, balance out the presentation. It's not too hard to figure out. Until and unless the mainstream media, in my humble opinion, ABC, NBC, CBS, and CNN, and the New York Times, start to address this issue pragmatically, realistically, and truthfully, I think the cover-up has a very good chance of continuing more or less indefinitely, Bill. I really do.
That's what it looks like so far. I don't see any change in that direction yet. That's for sure.
What do we expect now with respect to these underground cities and bases? Will we at some point in time have someone step forward who A, served in them and will be able to produce some smuggled videotape or something out of greys and humans at work? And if indeed that does happen, and we've seen film before, now we've got an alien interview allegedly about to be released by Rocket Films, which has already been called into question by a number of experts, but will someone be surfacing on a fairly regular basis with yet a new and sensational piece of, quote, evidence to stir the pot?
I think so. I think you can almost predict it because somebody, it's like for every force there's a counter force.
Exactly.
Somebody wants to get this stuff out, even if it's great risk. And, of course, the security on this is so tight. And, there's no doubt about this. I mean, there are pictures of the security armed to the teeth. They've got the latest high-tech motion-detecting gear and everything else, okay? These projects are well guarded. And, of course, this is one of the reasons why they're underground. They're well protected. You can control entries and exits and all kinds of things. And nothing leaves. And if something leaves and it gets away with it, well, we ridicule it. It's just a story.
Or worse, and I would imagine...
Remove records. Records can be altered. They can be removed.
Oh, humans can be removed, too.
And humans can be removed unless they go very high profile. Quickly.
Real fast. Yeah, that's right. And then they're the targets of all sorts of innuendo and the usual. You said,
this guy claims to have a degree. Well, we looked into it. He doesn't have any degrees.
That's true. Yeah. You said something earlier, Bill, which we need to talk about after this break, and that's 3 years. You mentioned 3 years, and I want to pursue that a little bit more with you here at Sightings on the Radio. I'm Jeff Rense, and this is the Premier Radio Network.
Ten seconds.
Okay, we're back with Bill Hamilton. And Bill, what about this 3 years that you hear? That's a rather short fuse for something, and what might be that fuse attached to?
Well, all I know is that a couple of the sources said that the original plan was to have a public alien presence by the year 2025, and that particular timeline had been moved up, and what caused that or what the contributing factors were, I have no idea.
Could be that I've heard, and you have probably too, that the ETs have sort of said, it's time to let the alien out of the bag, so to speak, or we're going to do it ourselves.
I've heard that, and I'm not too sure which way they're going to move on this because they're not real predictable, and they don't think exactly like we do. I think they're a little bit amazed about how fast we make decisions about things. And since they are interconnected in a way that we can't quite comprehend because we don't experience that telepathic awareness that they have with each other, okay? So they don't make decisions on an individual basis like we do, or as rapidly as we do.
And we also hear,
huh?
Yes, we also hear that there may be 6 to 10 different types of aliens here, species, if you will.
Oh, I'm sure. In fact, I'm sure that as far as visitations are concerned, there's been many more than that over the years, with only maybe a half a dozen or more that are intimately connected to our internal affairs here.
And one wonders which group we are primarily dealing with. We always hear about the Greys, but then we hear about people who report the Greys have apparently a higher structure of authority over them, which can be the tall blondes. Some report the reptilians, some report the insect type, some report seeing the large, tall, hooded figures. We have a lot of different things indicating that there is certainly a polyglot of aliens at some form or another, at some level, working in concert.
Yeah, and it's because we're denied knowledge of whatever it is that has been learned over this period of time, that the learning curve is going to be tremendous here because of the gap between whatever has been learned on the inside and what we still know on the outside. I mean, our knowledge is we have to fight tooth and nail for it.
And the disinformation aspect of it is particularly galling, frustrating, and angering, especially for people like you. And as I have talked about on this program a number of times, in the world there may be 100 full-time UFO ET researchers, and that's it. There are a lot of part-timers, but there are very few people who actually go out this tooth and nail full-time. And you know what I'm talking about. The disinformation people, Bill Hamilton, who work who knows where, maybe at an underground facility, and with the Internet as their vector, have to be having a field day. They have to be backslapping it sometimes because they can play such games with so many people at the speed of light.
Oh, I'm sure. Yep, I've run into it.
Well, I know, I know, we both know that you know and I know what we're talking about here.
Well, see, what we have done is we've decided to take a focus here by forming a Skywatch team. And that focus is, first, we have to make the public more aware that we have evidence. What is that evidence? Well, what impresses the people most is visual evidence. So we're out there trying to take as many videos as possible, and when you start seeing one video after another, and you start seeing some of the same things, just like you're seeing in the videos out of Mexico, then you start to get people to pay attention. I mean, that's the first thing, to pay attention. Another thing is we have to educate the public because we're dealing with a public who has asked the question, how long does it take Earth to go once around the sun, cannot answer that question.
I know, it's amazing.
So we're going through a barrier of illiteracy here, too, as well. I mean, it's just absolutely amazing what we have to deal with.
We may be fighting a losing battle there because the reading test scores are plummeting like a rock in a pond, and we're fighting MTV and 43 hours a week, Bill, of the average child watching television, and that's not the child's fault.
I know.
And you know what, these reading test scores, not to get off the point here, but there was a big article in the paper about how the test scores have declined so terribly, so dramatically in the last 6 to 8 years. And the solution was deemed to find more interesting texts for the kids to read, more interesting books. My God, we have a world full of interesting books. It's the kids' parents who are not creating environments for those children to read. And it's partly the school system's fault, but it's ultimately, it goes right back to the home. And that's what you're talking about. How do we educate a populace that is being dumbed down at such speeds? It's a blur. It's almost impossible.
And there's few creative minds around anymore. People who question dogma, people who question ideas, people who question theories that have been around for years and say, well, you know, there's some problems with this.
Exactly. We have to pause, Bill, now, so please be patient. Thank you for the interruption, and we'll be right back with Mr. Bill Hamilton here in our remaining minutes at Sightings on the Radio.
Ten seconds.
Okay, Bill Hamilton, let's do your website here before we run completely out of time. This program has gone entirely too fast, as so many of them do, so please give us that information.
Okay, yeah, my Alien Magic is the title of my website. It is named after my book. You can find it either from the Art Bell website or you can find it from a search engine looking for UFO sites.
Uh-huh.
And it's out on AOL. It is at members.aol.com/BILLH46088/newhome.htm.
You need to get a better address, Bill Hamilton.
Yeah, I need a better one than that. But that's why I say you can find it through a search engine looking for UFOs.
Just go to Alien Magic on Alta Vista or something?
Yeah, Alien Magic.
Okay. How about Bill Hamilton? Will you be there?
Will I be there? Yeah.
Okay.
That people can reach me by email from my website.
Good. All right. The state of the art is that you think something may happen in the next 3-4 years, perhaps. You think the timetable may have been moved forward.
I see some indirect evidence of that in that the sightings seem to be building and not abating, and it's worldwide. And the interaction with larger groups of people is increasing. And so I think there could very well be something to this. In fact, I hope there is. I hope there's some kind of an outcome here that we can eventually all see for ourselves.
It would be nice, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I think that we're also dealing with the question of if we're shooting at anyone coming here, who's keeping score? How do we separate the shooters from the shootees, and so on and so forth? I mean, we're working with some of these guys in all likelihood, and yet we're shooting at others. I mean, so I think you kind of need, this is a little silly.
Well, yeah, it sounds like that, but for instance, if we made allies with a foreign country, that foreign country may have some enemy. And then by adopting a friend, we've also adopted an enemy.
Yep.
So we might have to look at it that way.
Yeah, it's a strange set of bedfellows at the very least. All right, so we're going to see more sightings, more strange videotapes, and more strange people coming forward with the inside story, correct?
I think there's going to be more people breaking silence. That's what I call it.
And some of them breaking it legitimately and some with disinformation.
There you go, and we're going to have to sift it all out.
All right, Bill. That's the fun part, isn't it?
Yes, definitely.
Bill, thank you for spending 2 hours with me again. It's always a great pleasure to have you on the program, and we will have you back again very soon.
Okay, thank you very much, Bill.
Thanks, Bill. Take care.
All right.
And good night to all of you. Thanks for being with me again tonight at Sightings on the Radio. Tomorrow night, it's my night off, and I'll be back Sunday night again. Terrific program for you this Sunday, 3 hours with America's most gifted, respected, and decorated and honored remote viewer, Joseph McMoneagle. You want to know about remote viewing, Joe McMoneagle is the guy to tell you. That's Sunday night right here at Sightings on the Radio. So until then, have yourselves a great night, and good luck.